Fulfillment is when you do, say, think, believe, and feel things that are the true expression of who you really are in alignment with who you aspire to be. Fulfillment's the best teacher. When you're unfulfilled, it's your soul, your emotions saying you are not in alignment with what you're supposed to be doing. And in that moment, when you feel that discomfort, do you actually answer the call?
Welcome to the Outlier Mindset Podcast, your guide for living a life by design. Here, we explore the journey of becoming an outlier, finding your purpose, mastering your mindset, optimizing your health, achieving financial freedom, and building a life centered around your passions. So tune in, transform, and thrive. Welcome to the Outlier Mindset. Let the journey begin. Hey everybody, welcome to the Outlier Mindset Podcast. I'm your host, Robin Schley, and today our guest is Alan Lazaros. Alan embarked on a profound journey of self-discovery and improvement after suffering a nearly fatal car accident at the age of 26. Since then, he has dedicated himself to a life of purpose while focusing on peak performance, productivity, and personal growth. Now, leading a global team at Next Level University and specializing in helping others achieve their highest potential, Alan's mission is to guide individuals and businesses to the next level in life, love, health, and wealth using a heart-driven yet straightforward approach. Alan, thanks for coming on to the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. Like I mentioned, the production value of your show is very high. I already did my research. And let's talk a little bit about regret and fulfillment and transformation and growing through adversity. I'm super pumped. Seriously, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, life is good. And a lot of our listeners are entrepreneurial. They're very entrepreneurial, which is the toughest thing about being an entrepreneur, by the way, is spelling it. It's about the toughest word for people to spell. But I'm going to talk a lot today, and you brought up regret. You brought up what it's like to live a fulfilling life and avoid regret. And so many people go through life and they're not living a life according to their purpose, what they should be doing, the things that they want to be doing. They're doing things, getting up, going to the job they don't want to be working in, doing a lot of things they don't want to be doing. And they get to the end of that life and regret creeps in. And so I'm really excited to talk to you today a little bit about how people can avoid that, avoid getting to the end of that life and avoiding regret.
So my relationship with regret, I think, became a very positive one after 26. I got in a tough car accident, and my father, so when I was 2 years old, my father passed away in a car accident when he was 28 years old. And so I grew up without a dad. I had a stepfather from age 3 to 14. My real last name is actually McCorkle, and I took my stepfather's last name when I was 7, and then he left my family when I was 14 years old. My stepfather left, and he kind of took his family with him, took a lot of the income with him as well. And so I went from sort of upper middle class. I playfully refer to that part of my life as boats and BS. And it was kind of like the late 90s, early 2000s. We, snowmobiles and we had a yacht and deep sea fishing and vacations and ski trips and all that kind of stuff. But at home, my mom and stepdad didn't really get along well. So it was sort of this superficial, fun, pleasure-centered, oriented life. And when I was 26, I got in a car accident myself that was really, it shook me to my core. That's the best way I can describe it. And so I think, when you have the death of a loved one, death of a pet, when you face your own mortality, it forces you to face regret. And you can't really run from the shame and trauma and regret anymore. So you hit sort of rock bottom and then you rebuild your life from that place. And I think that that's the growth journey in many regards. For me at 26, my dad died at 28, didn't get the second chance. I got the second chance. And so for me, I rebuilt myself from the ashes of that phoenix, so to speak. And ever since then, I've actually worn this necklace around my neck. For those of you on video, you can see it. It's a North Star. And I always say this quote of, you can't see the stars during the day. They're always there, but sometimes it takes the darkness to see clearly that which you simply could not within the light. And what I mean by that is I was in the dark emotionally, mentally, and physically. Not physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. Physically, I was actually okay, luckily. But I was in all the regret of the dark, and I saw this light that I had never seen before. It was a book by Bronnie Ware called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. Now, as someone who you and I already talked behind the scenes a little bit about regret, I'm assuming have you heard of that book?
Yeah, of course. It's a beautiful book.
Oh, so good. Okay, so I have these flashcards that are all tattered now, and if you're on video, you can see they're all like nasty and tattered because I've had them for so many years now. and they're actually ripped in half too. But right here, I have this one called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying, and it's written down. I actually got to interview Bronnie Ware, by the way, years later. So 4 years later after finding her book, and I got to interview her. It was really cool. But the number one regret of the dying, so Bronnie Ware, just to provide a little bit of context for your listeners, she was working in hospice with the terminally ill for 8 years, and she thought her job was to take care of them physically, when in reality, she realized her calling was to listen and be there for them in that way, connection. And she realized they all had, I wish, the same regrets. And she wrote a book about it called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. And the number one regret of the dying is I wish I had lived a life true to myself and not what others expected of me. And so and that was definitely my regret. When I faced mortality at 26 after that car accident, I had that, okay, I've totally been living a life I was quote unquote supposed to lead. And I was successful. The best way I describe it is I was successful from the outside in. 1% global earner, 150 grand in an investment account with all tech stocks, paid off 84,000 worth of college debt in a single year, master's degree, computer engineering bachelor's, one of the best tech schools in the world. My college, Worcester Polytechnic Institute, WPI, I went to. It's kind of like a mini MIT, and all these corporate jobs and opportunities and rising quickly. So from the outside in, I was really successful, but from the inside out, I was not fulfilled. And so I used to chase success and achievement at the expense of fulfillment. And I've now since learned and matured a lot about how do I focus on fulfillment and character and core values and who I am as a person and self-improvement, and then have success be a byproduct of that. And so I don't think that's uncommon. I think a lot of people are on that path toward whatever they thought was quote unquote success. And I think we all have this sort of, I call it my quarter life crisis, but a lot of people have a midlife crisis, quarter life crisis. I'm 35 now. That was 9 years ago. And 9 years ago, I had my wake up call and I started to really think about regret and think about fulfillment a lot. And now those are my two biggest teachers.
Yeah. I mean, so a lot of people, you went through a traumatic event. So you had a car accident and it was a wake up call for you. That was kind of your darkest moment that brought you into the light, right? But what about the people who don't have that moment? I talk to so many people who do have that moment where it's something that triggered their life. It woke them up. But there's a lot of people that aren't facing that traumatic moment. How do those people start to identify and start to wake up?
That's the question. That's a great question. Someone asked me one time, do you think it's possible to have that same level of growth and transformation without the car accident? And I said yes and no. No, from the sense of there's PTSD, and if you ever study PTSD, it's a very real thing. And I struggled after that car accident. Double yellow lines scared me. I got claustrophobic. Crowds bothered me for a while. Like I had some serious stuff to work through. And I remember puffing my chest up and walking in and out of a doorway to try to overcome my claustrophobia. And I remember I kept getting pulled over because double yellow lines scared me because I ended up on the wrong side of the road when I got in my car accident. I was supposed to yield and I didn't, and I had a head-on collision. So with what I thought was a Mack truck, luckily it was not. It was a lift-kitted pickup truck. But I had to work through all that stuff. So PTSD is a very real thing. It's very debilitating. It's very challenging. And I had my own small version of that, I would say, for sure, after the car accident. I think even saying small probably isn't true. It was tough. But there's something that comes with that. Every downside has an upside. Every upside has a downside. And as you mature in life, you really start to understand that. And so the upside was post-traumatic growth. So we talk about PTSD, but there's post-traumatic growth that comes with it. And so your adversity can become your advantage if you use it as an opportunity to see those stars you couldn't see before, like a resource like that book, Top 5 Regrets of the Dying, or the other star that I saw was Tony Robbins' TED Talk, Why We Do What We Do. Regardless of what you think of Tony, his TED Talk is world class. I mean, it's just unbelievably good, and I highly recommend it for everyone. But
I've
that
seen
really
it.
got
It's
me.
great.
Go ahead.
I said I've seen it. It's a great podcast. Or excuse me, it's a great TED Talk.
TED Talk. Yeah, that was another one for me where that was my first real deep exposure to self-improvement, to exploring my own why I do what I do and really going deep. And so to answer your original question, how does someone who isn't divorced or getting in a car accident or facing mortality or death of a loved one or death of a pet, how do you facilitate that growth proactively instead of reactively after tragedy? It's uncommon because normally when things are okay, we don't do the work. So for example, I have a therapist, her name's Carol, and I started doing therapy in my 30s. And it's been unbelievable, by the way. It's been awesome. If you've ever studied internal family systems, that's the modality. It's really, really cool. And you can study that another time if you want. And if you're curious about it, I can talk about it here. But at the end of the day, I was doing so well and things are flourishing and I'm winning. I actually had that genuine thought of, I wonder if I should still be paying out of pocket for my therapist because everything's really good. See what I'm saying? It's like, oh, well, I'm in shape. I might as well stop going to the gym. The reason I went to the gym in the first place is because I was so wildly unfulfilled after that car accident. I was 100 pounds, skinny, fat, drank too much and too often, alcohol problem. And I got fitness saved my life in many regards. I was and now all of a sudden I'm in shape. So it's like, oh, I guess I can step off the gas a little bit. And so how do you do it without a car accident? It's radical humility. You have to have the humility to know that just because everything's great right now doesn't mean I don't need therapy. And that's the truth. Because we joke about it at Next Level University, our business. We say, yeah, it worked so well, we stopped doing it. And that's what happens. We get comfortable and we forget to keep getting uncomfortable. And so how do you do the uncomfortable work while you're comfortable? And how do you always stay a little uncomfortable in the comfort? And how do you do the hard things even when you don't have to, even when your back's not up against the wall? And I think if you can pull that off, you really have something special.
Yeah. And so what about the person who's sitting there in life they're not fulfilled. They're not living their purpose. They're getting up every morning. They're miserable at what they're doing, but they don't have this trigger yet either. They don't have this thing. Like for me, when I recall when my mother passed on, which is a very traumatic event for me, where I saw a woman who had so many things that she's worried about in life, so many things that she had to take care of, like bills. She had her house payment, she had her car payment. She was worried about dating. She's worried about all this stuff. But then when she died, it just all stopped. None of those worries mattered. None of those arguments mattered. None of those things mattered. That house didn't matter. The car didn't matter. But there are so many people in that routine in life who is kind of like, I'm comfortable. I'm not living my purpose. I'm not living a life that I want to be living, but I'm comfortable. What about that person? How do you get that person to someday get up in the morning and have that breakthrough where they wake up and say, this isn't the life I meant to be living. I need to go in this direction because this is what I want to be doing.
So my answer to that is fulfillment and regret are the best teachers. And then the questions you ask yourself. So I'll start with the first part. Excuse me, by the way, I'm coming over a cold a little bit. So if I'm coughing into the mic at all, I apologize.
We'll cut it.
Okay. Thank you. So the fulfillment and regret piece. Okay. So fulfillment and regret. Fulfillment, I believe, I'll give you two definitions. One's going to be more science. One of them is going to be a little more woo-woo. The woo-woo definition of fulfillment is the soul's recognition of alignment with its highest calling. Okay. Why are we fulfilled after doing certain things? I believe it's because we're expanding and growing in the direction of what we're called to. And we're usually serving something greater than ourselves, usually. So that's fulfillment, the woo-woo definition. What is my scientific definition of fulfillment? Fulfillment is when you do, say, think, believe, and feel things that are the true expression of who you really are in alignment with who you aspire to be. It's when you're acting in your highest self. Okay. Usually in some form of mastery. You're mastering self, mastering some craft. Maybe it's basketball or snowboarding or podcasting. Okay, so right now I'm trying to master the art of communication. Half the reason I come on other podcasts, number one, I want to add as much value as possible in alignment with my calling. Number two, I want to practice my craft. I want to get better at this. If you think I'm a strong communicator, it's only because of the 1,000 times I've done this before. I was not good at the start. Trust me, I have my first YouTube video saved. It is awful. It's awful. But I had to start somewhere. Okay, so that's fulfillment. So fulfillment's the best teacher. When you're unfulfilled, it's your soul, your emotions saying, hey man, hey girl, hey woman, you are not in alignment with what you're supposed to be doing. And in that moment, when you feel that discomfort, do you numb it with alcohol like I used to? Do you numb it with Netflix? Do you numb it with drugs? Do you numb it with vices? Or do you actually answer the call? Do you really listen and go and ask questions and get curious? Why am I so unfulfilled? Oh, well, I don't really like my job that much. Okay, well, why did I work there in the first place? Well, I used to like it. Okay, well, why don't you like it now? Well, I used to have a boss that was actually a good leader, and the industry used to be fulfilling for me because I was doing this other thing. And then I got promoted and I got more money, but I don't actually like what I'm doing. And now I bought a house I can't afford without that job, right? So you get to the deeper layers. And I always say, if you want to get to the next level in life, in the real world, not on social media status, you have to go to a deeper layer. You have to go to a deeper part of the iceberg in order to reach a new level. And so that's the fulfillment part. Okay, so fulfillment is a teacher if you let it teach you. And it's the questions you ask when you get those, I'm not really fulfilled. Why not? Okay, and then the other one is regret. And this is the fail forward one. This is the give podcasting a shot. And do you love it? Are you fulfilled after? Or is it like, yeah, I don't know if that's me. I don't know if that feels like me. You ever had a moment? One of my mentors early on, he said, best relationship advice ever, because he had gotten a tough divorce. And he said, Alan, whatever you do in a relationship, don't do anything that feels too unnatural. I'm all for integration and compatibility and trying to, and I coach couples with my girlfriend, Emilia. So we've been doing this for 3.5 years, and I'm all for integration, not necessarily settling and compromise, but don't do anything that feels too unnatural. So for me, I'm an achiever. I'm always going to be an achiever. I always have been. I don't ever do anything just to like have fun. If I'm going to play video games, I'm going to be one of the top gamers in the world. If I'm going to podcast, I'm going to do episodes. If I am going, I dial everything up to 11. It is who I am. I just adore going all in. And for a lot of people, they're like, why do you do that? Like, they can't understand why. Maybe that's not who they're supposed to be. I used to not know. It's like, why does everyone think I should work less? I don't understand. I love this, right? Okay. So that's number 2 is regret. You'll have regret when you try stuff and you'll regret it. Here's what most people do with regret. Regret is the best teacher on planet Earth. In the whole universe, regret is the best teacher, but we don't want to feel pain. So we pretend it's not there. And we say, oh, no regrets. Well, if I didn't do that, then I wouldn't have gotten here. Fair. Okay? How do you hold the duality of, I don't regret not seeing the yield sign and getting in that car accident because it led me to here, but in the future, I'm going to look for yield signs. How do you hold that duality? And duality, for those of you who don't know, it's the simple expression of holding 2 seemingly opposing ideas in your consciousness simultaneously. And I think that that's one of the reasons why human beings struggle so much. I call it the 2 trains. You have to be warm and loving and vulnerable and honest and courageous, but you also have to be super stoic and strong and disciplined and structured and never let them see you sweat. It's both. It's always both. It's an and, it's not an or. All of us are righty or lefty. We think everyone's wrong, and that's why we're all wrong. How do you be physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually developed holistically? How do you be ambidextrous? We have the IQs of the world that are brilliant in numbers and structure, and they have the emotional intelligence of a 14-year-old. And then you've got these emotionally intelligent, heart-driven, wonderful people who just do not win in the economy, no matter how hard I try to help them. I don't think that that's what's best. I think what's best is trying to find a way to be ambidextrous in the 21st century by learning from both fulfillment and regret, by being both strong and warm, by being both emotionally mature and intellectually intelligent, by being personally developed and professionally developed. I have some people that are so professionally developed, their resumes are on point and they're crushing it in the economy, but their marriage is suffering because they can't have a real conversation about anything deep. And then I've got people that can go deep, but they just don't have their resume. They don't even have a LinkedIn. And they wonder why they're not winning in the economy. And to me, I used to be the high IQ, low EQ guy. And now I think I've really pivoted to try to be a lot more ambidextrous.
You said something too. You said something about, about your drive, about your work ethic, like what you like to do, putting out all the podcasts and really going in and doing a lot of teaching and working relentlessly at your craft, which is a great thing. I love that. And I'm kind of the same way. I drive every single day. But you said, I don't do this for fun. But I'd argue that you're having a good time doing it because it aligns with exactly who you are.
Fun, I think, is a byproduct of being in alignment. Well, there's 2 types of fun, 2 types of everything, right? So on one side, you have fun that is chasing pleasure, I think, at the expense of fulfillment. So, for example, if I were to eat a bunch of donuts and go to a carnival and go off the rails so much that I neglect all my responsibilities, get wasted, have a blast, I'm going to have regret the next day. I've done it. I'm going to have regret the next day because I neglected my responsibilities and I hurt my health in the process and all these things. And so a lot of people think pleasure is the point of life. A lot of people have an unconscious paradigm of belief that life is about having as much fun as you can have. But I think fun is a lot like laughter. You can't force someone to laugh. Laughter is the byproduct of a joke. I think fun is the byproduct of living a deeply meaningful life, living a fulfilling life in alignment with who you are and who you aspire to be. And that's the thing that we get confused about. Is it future self or present self? Okay, future self wants to contribute, make a difference, be profitable, be financially free, lead a big team, be the CEO of my own company. Okay, present self wants to watch a movie tonight and eat some delicious food and get a pizza. And how do you integrate present and future self? I think flow state, peak performing state, is when you're in the zone. I think it's the present, past, and future all coming in simultaneously. And so I think right now I'm in flow and I'm enjoying the hell out of it because this is aligned with who I am, which you've obviously created a safe space for me to be myself, which I'm really grateful for. Because on some podcasts, I don't get into flow, usually because of the insecurity of the host, or maybe I'm not the right guest. It could be a combination of both. But at the end of the day, I feel like I'm in my calling. I'm in my purpose right now. I'm growing and contributing in a profitable way, even if it's indirectly profitable, toward what I'm supposed to be doing in the world. And I think that that's what fun, I think fun can be a byproduct of that, even though fun isn't the goal. I didn't come on here for fun, right?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about feelings for a second too, and how you were feeling prior to your awakening. Let's call your accident the awakening, where you came out and you figured a lot of things out for yourself. But you were talking about the problems that you were going through before, and you were turning to some alcohol to feel a certain way. You were turning to things that were not healthy for you, physically, probably not mentally, those types of things. How did it feel when you broke out compared to where you were at? I mean, could you feel the difference? Could you feel the energy lift? Could you feel it inside you?
Yeah. The best analogy I have for this is a clear glass of water versus a glass of water with like a bunch of mud in it. The best way I can describe the feeling is with that image. There's 4 modalities of thinking, and one of them is energy, one of them is images, one of them's words, and one of them's math, numbers. Mine's math mainly. So in this case, for the image modality of thinking, people will like this a lot. So picture a clear glass of water. It's sunny and the sun is behind the glass of water, and you're looking at the sun through the glass of water and you're pouring clear water into it. Now picture that same thing, but it's Diet Coke, and the sun can't get through. It's like murky. And now picture that Diet Coke and pour water into it over and over and over again to where the water's overflowing and it gets less and less murky over time. That's the best way I can describe what happened to me after the car accident. I just became a clear glass of water slowly over time as I got more physically developed, mentally developed, emotionally developed, and spiritually developed. And before the car accident, I was numbing. I just didn't know it. I was numbing my emotions. I had the whisper. of, Alan, you really shouldn't drink so much. I had the whisper of, you never talk about your dad. You never talk about how your father passed away. You always avoid the conversation. I always had these whispers of, that you're not in shape and it bothers you. Some people are out of shape and it doesn't seem to bother them. That's fine for them. For me, it bothered me every day and I didn't do anything about it. And these whispers, they come up, and eventually the whisper will become a scream, and eventually no alcohol, no drugs, none of that will be able to suppress it. And after the car accident, all the noise, all the junk in my glass, all the trauma from my past, all the kind of losing 3 families by the time I'm 14 years old. So I'll give a brief synopsis of that. I didn't even realize this till my 30s, by the way. But when my birth father passed away, we kind of stopped connecting with his side of the family because we were trying to be a sort of family unit with my stepfather. I took his last name, and then, I had my mom's side and my stepfather's side. And, Christmases, holidays, that whole thing. When he leaves at 14, he takes his family with him. I haven't seen any of them since. None of them. And him neither. I connected with him on Facebook. We've had some conversations via message, but I haven't seen him in person. And that's something I'm still hopefully going to get lunch. I don't know if he'll answer me or not. But then my mom's side, her and her sister got in a really bad argument. And they got in a fight. And then my aunt, Sandy, sort of ostracized us from the family. So by the time I'm 14 years old, I go from upper middle class, excited to go to high school and college, to I get free lunch at school now because our income is so low. I'm shopping at Salvation Army and thrift stores. We have such low income. I don't know how I'm going to even go to college. I have to get every bit of financial aid and scholarships that I can possibly get my hand on to go to my dream school, WPI, which is Polytechnic Institute. And I just had to figure it out. And we did, fortunately. And I think that the lesson underneath all of that is two things. One, I had tons of trauma that I didn't know I had, that I just didn't deal with, because that was all I ever knew. And then number two, I somehow made my adversity into my advantage. And this is the quote that I use now with my clients is, when you're in the deep, dark hole, it feels like you're never going to climb out. But the skills and the tools that we develop climbing out of deep, dark holes also build skyscrapers. If you're in a mountain of debt and you finally get to the point where you have to figure out how to climb out of that, you're going to go learn finance. And then when you're out of debt, now what? Let's build a nest egg. And now all of a sudden you're wealthy later on. And you're actually wealthier than the person who was smooth sailing, never in any debt, because you actually felt pain of all the debt of your poor choices. And so the only sort of thing that I would share here is the lukewarm middle is the danger zone. It's the lukewarm middle where I always say nothing grows on the fence. You got to make a choice. I would rather you give it a shot, be vulnerable and fall in love and then screw it up than just stay on the fence with this surface level manufactured relationship that's, well, we're kind of friends, but we're a little bit more than friends, but we're not courageous enough to actually give this a real shot. And so I think the people that are courageous enough to shoot for something greater are the ones who end up with more pain and adversity, but they also grow way more. And so therefore they're more fulfilled. So it's this weird thing of, well, you can't grow without adversity, but you don't want to like purposely get adversity. So you have to somehow choose the challenges that are aligned proactively and then somehow be okay with the pain associated with that and then get growth and contribution through that. And there's only two ways to have adversity in life, I've found, is it either happens to you, like the car accident or losing my stepfather. Like I wasn't in control of any of that. My father passing away when I was 2. Or the adversity that comes from having huge goals and dreams. I didn't know this until my 30s, but I chose both. And I'm proud of the man I've become through it. And my therapist to this day says, I don't understand how the hell you did that. And I think I've figured out how. It's self-belief. I don't know where I got it, but I have like a ridiculously high amount of self-belief. So every time adversity struck, I just found a way to build a bigger future in my mind. And I just kept trusting that I could somehow come out of this thing better, no matter how dark it got. And I think that's what I would have everyone check in with to make this more practical rather than the big soliloquy about me, which is how much self-belief do you actually have? And if I'm triggering anyone that's listening or watching, it's most likely because you don't have a ton of self-belief. People that have low self-belief get triggered by me very easily. I've never felt like a super easily likable person.
It's great to trigger.
Go ahead.
I love triggering. I mean, I think that's so healthy for people to get triggered.
It depends what they do with it, but yes.
Yes. Yeah. I was thinking too, Alan, about what you were saying, in terms of peak performers and people who are at their best and really living their best lives. So many of those people have come from high traumatic experiences through life, or big time obstacles maybe that they had to get over. Most peak performers, most people who are in tune, in line, have gone through a lot of the stuff like you have gone through. Their own stories, their own things that have happened to them. Same thing with me. I've had my own stories, my own trauma that I've dealt with in my life. But I kind of feel like you have two different ways you can go there. You can either be a high performer who's spiraling upward, or those other set of people spiral downward. And I've always tried to figure out, what is the difference between those people? What makes the difference between somebody who can spiral up and that person who spirals down?
So that I've been asking myself that question my whole life, because I think that in some ways, and I don't want to, I love my sister dearly, but I think in some ways I always wondered why her and I have gone through very similar things and I chose a different path than she did. I'll leave it there. But I would say there have been some very obvious, like, what makes the difference? So you see two siblings that both had the same challenging or traumatic upbringing, and one of them ends up becoming something so constructive and positive for the world, and the other one ends up falling victim to vices and self-doubt and toxic behaviors. And I think we've all been on both ends of that at times, right? So I think the trend line is up for me, fortunately. But I would say the difference I've found, what makes that difference? I've been searching for that answer my whole adult life. Self-belief. I'm convinced of it. If you have high self-belief, you will have high goals. Now, here's the problem. Self-worth and self-belief look like the same thing. So imagine someone, everyone right now, imagine someone who they act like they're super confident. They act super confident. Like picture the stereotypical athlete who doesn't have to work hard, who's just naturally gifted in high school, who never grew out of that. And they still talk about how awesome they were in high school. Like picture that person. They have high inflated fake self-worth. They don't have real self-belief. Now, here's how you know. And this is, when I figured this out, it changed my whole life. Why would someone who acts like they have level 10 confidence have level 2 goals? It's not real. I would go out into the world and I would tell people, I always do state and prove. There's another thing in communication called inform and lead. The other reason I trigger people is I do state and prove. I'm really smart, so then I'm going to go get really smart. A lot of people think that's arrogant, when in reality, I'm just saying into the world what I'm going to be, and then I go align with that. And that's not how most people think. That said, I've always been state and prove, so I didn't understand why everyone thought I was so arrogant. I would say, I'm going to go do X, I'm going to go do Y, I'm going to go do this. And then when I achieved it, they'd come to me and they'd be like, oh my God, you did it, oh my God. And I'd be like, so you obviously didn't think I was going to actually do it.
Yeah.
And so you didn't really believe that I was actually going to do it because you're so shocked when I actually do. So the podcasting thing, I'm going to have a successful podcast. People come, oh my God, you did it. It's like, what did I tell you I was going to do? You know what I mean? And again, that sounds really arrogant to anyone who struggles with self-doubt. So I have empathy for that. But most people who have inflated fake ego self-worth, they say stuff, but they don't actually mean it. I literally don't say goals that I don't intend on doing. And by the way, I reverse engineered what it's going to take in advance. And I presuppose all the suffering and all the struggle and all the sacrifice. Turns out other people are just like saying stuff that would be nice. And so what happens is when you actually state and prove, you build self-belief. You say, I'm going to go do X, you go do X, and then you self-assign it. It's called self-efficacy in the psychology. You can study it. But the people who say stuff and never do it, it crushes their self-belief. It's not real. So then they have to get their ego even bigger. The bravado, it gets even bigger. Because deep down, they're actually in the shame of the fact that they're full of it and they know it. And I think we've all been guilty of that to some extent. Prior to my car accident, I was definitely full of it in certain things. But I think overall, statistically speaking, I'm on the very high end of self-efficacy. And I think that's what's made the difference is you can turn your adversities into your advantage if you have a big, bright future that you're committed to, and you have high self-belief in your ability to figure out how to get there. Whereas most people, if you don't have self-belief, you're not going to have goals. If you don't have goals, you're not going to orient yourself to anything greater. Why wouldn't you drink? Why wouldn't you do drugs? Why wouldn't you escape?
Right.
I think dreams saved my life. Dreams are what got me out of a toxic relationship. Dreams are what kept me going when I felt like there was no hope. Dreams are what got me on this podcast right now. Everything you and I learn on this show right now is a byproduct of our mutual dreams.
Yeah.
Which we wouldn't have if we didn't have self-belief. So I'm convinced that self-belief is by far the most important thing that you can ever work on, and no one taught us how to build it.
No, they never do. They tell you all the reasons why you can't, or why you need to conform, or why you need to be this way, or be a certain way, the way you need to sit in school, the way you need to study, the way you need to be at the dinner table, the way you need to... We're told everything that we should be throughout life. And then people kind of cock their head at us when we say, that's not what I want. Because they can't differentiate the fact that it's not about them and what they need and what they want to be. It's what we want to do. And when you say you're going to do something, like you've got the confidence to do it. I'm going to go do this, and you go out and do it. And I could totally see where if you've got some person who's out there saying, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that, and then they don't do the work. They don't take the action. They don't put it out into the world. And then they don't make it. It doesn't come to reality. And they go, oh, that's me. You know, I'm a failure. I'm a this. And then they just drop down a step instead of popping up a step.
That's destroys their self-belief instead of builds it. I did a marathon on a whim once, and I said I was going to do it for years, and I eventually just did it. And I didn't train. It was 3 days out from a weigh-in. And there's a whole story behind that. But I ended up doing it. And the half marathon was actually pretty easy. The full marathon was way harder than I thought. Holy crap. I also did it in 95-degree weather while trying to be dehydrated. So it was reckless. I'm a little bit reckless, okay? But one of my team members at the time, his name's Matt, he's like, you know what blew my mind? It isn't the fact that you did a marathon on a whim, which, by the way, I had said for years I was going to try that at some point. So to me, it wasn't that crazy. And my business partner, Kevin, he says, people train for years for a marathon. You just did one. I said, I aspire to be in good enough shape to run a marathon on a whim. I do. That's who I did a triathlon on a whim once, and it went really well. It was brutal, but it went well. And granted, it was a smaller one. I think it was a 5K bike. No, 14-mile bike, 500, a half-mile swim, and then 5 for the run. But the point is that I'm not training for a marathon. I'm training to live a life where I could do a marathon if I wanted to. And I know how weird that might sound, but when I did that, Matt reached out. He's like, that's what blew my mind, is the fact that you did it with no one there. I did it on a track by myself. My girlfriend came halfway through and she did the second half with me, which might as well have been the beginning. There's a video of me really cocky in the middle of it, being like, I think I'm going to go for it in 5.5 hours. I think I got this. And then by the end, I'm like The Walking Dead, you know? I had to walk. I literally had to walk at the end. It was brutal. And then I was bedridden the whole next day, but she did the second half with me. And I think that that's one thing that I want to impart. So rather than making this all about me and my marathon, what I've come to understand is that saying I'm going to do that and then actually doing it, even though I failed, quote unquote, to run the whole time, I still crossed the finish line. And I need to explain this. The reason I crossed the finish line wasn't for any accolades, because no one was even there except for Emilia. It was because I knew I couldn't lose self-belief. I needed to prove to myself that I could hack it. I needed to prove to myself I could do it. And then after that, what else can I do? What else can I do? What else can I do? That's the world I want to live in. And if you have high self-belief, you look around you and you say, I don't understand. Like, why don't people support my dreams more? Why does everyone laugh at me when I say I'm going to start a podcast or say I'm going to XYZ? Why doesn't anyone support my dreams? They don't believe in themselves.
They don't believe in themselves. Exactly.
They don't believe in themselves. And you flip that coin, someone else says, hey, I want to do a marathon. And you go, you can do it. Awesome. Okay, what's your training regimen? And what are you going to eat? And how are you going to hydrate them? You just pour into people's dreams. I spent my life pouring into people's dreams. I'm still doing it right now.
Yeah.
And I never understood why no one did that. Self-belief.
Right.
When you have high self-belief, you don't even know that other people don't have it, because they all act like they do when they're around you. They're mirroring you. How vulnerable would it be to be like, honestly, your energy, you're triggering me, and instead of just lashing out at me, they would say, honestly, I just don't believe in myself as much as you do. How do you believe in yourself so much? And just be a student? That wasn't my experience growing up. My experience was, what? And then what was my trauma response to that? I'll show them one day.
Yeah.
So what did I do? My trauma response, fortunately, was dream bigger, get smarter, get stronger. Thank goodness. And then what does that make it better or worse?
Yeah.
And then my trauma response to that, dream bigger, get better, get stronger. And I finally in my 30s realized I'm running a trauma response. And turns out the more developed you become, the less likable you are and the less relatable you are. And so it only made the whole thing worse. And now I'm choosing to get better rather than defaulting to it as my trauma response, But
yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Alan, coming back, I want to go back for just a moment. You talked about a little bit about your family, about your sister, right? You guys grew up in the same environment, kind of the same upbringing. You had the same family dynamics. You had everything kind of the same. But the difference was you had this accident, right? You had this moment in your life where it woke you up. You had an awakening. I guess a couple of questions. If you didn't have that awakening, do you think you would still be in that same place that you're at, that where you were at when you were going through the trauma, when you were still drinking and still kind of damaging yourself? It sounds to me kind of like you have a family member who kind of went through the same thing, but they haven't had that waking up moment yet.
Yeah. So if you study the ACE score, there's something called an ACE score, ACE, Adverse Childhood Experiences. And there's a ACE pyramid that you can research. And I didn't know about any of this until my 30s. And I want to make that clear too, by the way, anyone who's listening or watching, while I was going through this stuff, I didn't know this. It's only after rewatching the movie of my own life that I've kind of started to actually understand all of this. So I want to make that clear. If you don't feel like you have as much clarity on your past, clarity comes as a byproduct of contemplation. So I always say rewatch the movie of your own life from this higher sense of awareness. It's like when you watch Finding Nemo again, and I saw it as a kid versus as an adult, you notice certain things you never noticed before. It's like, oh, that's actually deeper than I thought. That's funny. I didn't even get that joke before. But to answer your original question, the ACE score thing, the truth is, if I didn't get in the car accident, I don't think that I would. It's a duality. I think I would still manifest who this is right now, but maybe not as quick. Or I would have gotten really, really hurt or killed. And the reason I say that is because statistically speaking, if you do the research on the ACE score, there's an ACE pyramid, and the ACE pyramid, the top of the pyramid is death. So the bottom of the pyramid is adverse childhood experiences that lead to shame and guilt, and then mostly shame, and then shame leads to numbing and vices, and then that leads to an early death. And they've done a ton of research on this. I'm not gonna claim to know. I'm not like an ACE certified anything. But what I will say is that I think statistically speaking, I was headed toward, if I didn't deal with my trauma and my past and my challenges and the emotions and the bottled up stuff, I would have most likely gotten into something. Maybe it would be drinking too much and getting in a fight. Maybe it would be a car accident. Maybe it would be... So I think some wake-up call was coming for me because my behaviors were creating something that was going to be reckless, and reckless behavior statistically always ends up with some sort of rock bottom. But the problem is when life smacks you down, sometimes you try to smack it back. And instead of humility and gratitude for still being alive after a tough car accident, you end up going even deeper into the hole. And that's where nihilism versus optimism comes in. And this comes back to self-belief. It's not self-belief, it's belief. Do you believe that there is a bigger, better, brighter future for you and for the world? Or do you believe the best is in the past? Because if you believe the best is in the past, you're what's called a nihilist. And well, if the world's going to hell, why not? What's the point in working hard? What's the point in reading a book? No one reads a personal development book unless they believe in themselves and a bigger, better, brighter future. And it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like, well, the world's going to crap anyway, so why would I invest in it? Well, that's why it's going to crap, because if enough people believe in that, then we're all going to, be less, do less, have less, give less, become less, versus the opposite of, okay, the world smacked me. I'm humble and grateful for what I do have, and I'm going to be resourceful and try to build a bigger, better, brighter future out of that lesson. And if enough of us get on that side of the coin, that's how you change the world. And so fortunately, I was on that side of the coin. But I do think if it wasn't for a car accident, it would have been something else mostly.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I could totally see that. And, if it wasn't a car accident, it might have been another wake-up call. And it could have been something else in your life that triggered this change in you. So you just never know where it's going to come from. You never know what's going to trigger you to go one way or the other. But man, I'll tell you what, this has been so enlightening today. I really, really have enjoyed having you on here. You and I are going to have a philosophical conversation at some point about those who spiral up versus those who spiral down. I think it's something that you've been looking for answers, and I've been doing the same on that, because I really want to be able to be a part of the change to help those people who can't spiral upward, who are on that downward spiral. How can we lift those folks up and help them find that change that, like, we've been so fortunate to have an opportunity to go through and find that change for ourselves. So you and I are going to have a conversation on that one of these days.
I have enjoyed this thoroughly. It's very clear that we're on a similar mission to help inspire, motivate, educate people to take more responsibility for their own bigger, better, brighter future. And destructive things are going to happen, but can you turn them into something constructive is the only question. And that's a choice. And it's easier said than done. Everything is. It's so much easier to talk on a podcast than to actually have gone through all this or build this. And so, yeah, just try to walk as much as you talk and try to take personal responsibility for your own self-belief and start building it. And when you build it, I'm telling you, doors open, and then that's another opportunity to build it even more. And you keep showing up, keep improving, keep getting smarter and stronger physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And you can look back at when you were in your 20s or teens and you go, oh my goodness, like, look at what I've built. Look at what I've made of myself. Yeah. And if you can look in that mirror, non-ego, and really, really say, like, whoa, I have become my own hero. This is unbelievable. Because I didn't have a male role model growing up. I had heroes everywhere. I was looking for heroes, Brad Pitt and Troy and The Rock. And, eventually you get in your 30s and all of them fall from the pedestal. And it's not that against Brad or The Rock. Eventually it's like, oh, okay, he's not quite as bright as I might have hoped or whatever. And eventually you surpass your mentors. I've had mentors and coaches that it's like, oh, as you get older, you have certain mentors where it's like, wow, their advice was amazing. And then other ones where it's like, oh, yeah, that was really inaccurate. And I think that's the growth journey. So thank you so much for having me. This has been nothing short of an honor. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Alan, where should people go to find you? I want them to be able to reach out to you, find you, learn more about what you're doing.
So My main focus is serving people on how to improve themselves. And people think that's selfish. It's you have self-belief, you have self-worth, you have self-respect, you have self-trust, you have self-discipline, you have self-esteem, you have self-confidence. I think it's the least selfish thing you can do is work on yourself, because back when I didn't, I was getting my junk on other people. And now that I'm working on myself every day, I'm fulfilled. People don't hurt people. Fulfilled people want to see more people fulfilled. And I think working on yourself is the way. So if you want to work on yourself, if you don't want to work on yourself, I will be nothing but a pain in your butt. If you do want to work on yourself, you can reach out Alan at Next Level, spelled just like it sounds, ALAN, at Next Level Universe. We have a podcast called Next Level University. The business is called Next Level University, but the person who has that URL is asking for way too much money. We've got a book club. We've got monthly meetups. We've got this journal that I use every day called the Dreamliner. I have one-on-one coaching. Kevin does podcast coaching. We've got a 21-person team. We've got 21 departments. We've got a charity that we do for kids without fathers, because Kevin and I both didn't have a father growing up. We do a whole bunch of stuff, and we would love to have you reach out if this resonated with you on the deepest levels and you want to improve yourself. We do holistic self-improvement every day. And just reach out, please. And please provide context if you email me, because obviously, like all of us, I get a lot of spam email. So if you do email me, just say, hey, I heard you and you said this, and just provide some context so that I know it's not spam.
Last question of the day, Alan. And I ask this to everybody at the end of each podcast, because I love this question. But if you could go back in time, and I think a lot about you and your younger self. You've talked so much about your younger self on this episode. But if you could go back in time and sit down and just talk to your younger self, what would be the one piece of the most valuable advice that you would sit down and give yourself?
Yeah, I love the question too. I really do. I think about this all the time, and it keeps evolving. The first thing would be self-belief and self-worth are the two most important things. Self-belief is your belief in your own ability to achieve something externally, but self-worth is your belief in your own value. So one is, I know I can build the castle. The other one is, I deserve to live in this castle. And typically people with high self-belief, not always, but typically, I was really nerdy, I got picked on a lot, I got bullied a lot, and I always had a lot of self-belief. And I think a lot of computer engineers do get bullied because they have a lot of self-belief, because they can reverse engineer. It's not hard to think you can make the best chicken marsala when you can reverse engineer the recipe really easily. And so for me, I had a lot of self-belief, and I didn't understand how much that triggered other people. And I would get bullied and picked on. And my dreams, I mean, if I had a nickel for every time someone said, you're crazy, or you could never do that, or it's just crazy. And in hindsight, I didn't have the courage to stand up to my bullies. I didn't have the courage to say, you know what? You kind of suck. And why are you picking on me? And honestly, I'm going to go do it. And now finally I've been courageous enough to actually do that stuff. And so what I would tell my younger self is, courage is going to be your issue. It's not going to be the next book. It's not going to be the next strategic thinking, long-term business acumen. That stuff comes naturally to you. You're a genius, Alan, and you know it. Just roll with that. What you need is courage, social courage. Other people don't believe in themselves like you do, and they're going to try to hold you back because they're so insecure. And if you want real self-worth, you have to have the courage to stick up for yourself. And you have to have the courage to call them out. You have to. So that's what I would tell my younger self, and hopefully that's valuable for someone who's listening.
Yeah, no, I love that. Definitely self-worth. I mean, so many people lack it. And it's one of the most instrumental things in your own personal growth is just believing in what you are and who you are. So Alan, thank you so much for being on the show today. We really appreciate having you here.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a breath of fresh air and an honor.